Hello and welcome to another comedian's interview for my blog and podcast, A Rich Comic Life. My name is Richard Gill and my blog describes my experiences of watching over 1,500 comedians and counting for the last 50 years. My very special guest today is the wonderful comedian Mr. Huw Thomas. Yay! Hello!
Good morning, Richard.
How are you?
Wonderful. No one's ever called me wonderful, Richard.
You are, to me, you're a legend. You really are. But we'll talk all about that later on. I'm so delighted to be chatting to you.
Well, it's nice to talk to you after all this time.
Exactly.
And you're a punter at the King's Head for so long.
Oh, tell me about it, which we'll talk about later on. We're going to talk about your wonderful, there we are again, your wonderful comic career. And I'd like to go right back to the start and ask you, please, how did you become a comedian in the first place?
I don't really know, to be honest, except for I trained in drama,
Right.
and then I was a folk singer, and a very bad folk singer, I have to say. And I used to play in folk clubs, which incidentally I loved and still love to this day, those little intimate, funny pub places up the top of a pub or down the bottom of a pub or something. And I discovered that nobody was very interested in my music, and I didn't blame them really. But I found that I could make people laugh a bit like, because I'm of that sort of age, just below sort of Billy Connolly and Jasper Carrot's probably younger than me. The people, Hamish Imlach, who were Dominic Bean, Brendan Bean's brother, who were storytellers as well as performers and singers, better singers and performer than I was. But they used to tell stories, and they were comic stories almost always. They used to get laughs. Billy Connolly, of course, that's how he really graduated into being a comic. And he could always fall back on his banjo, and I found one or two sort of musical comic things to do, and that was my staple diet. So I performed in folk clubs pretty infrequently, really, but I suppose the first time I realized that I could perhaps do comic routines was in the Londonderry Arms in Sunderland, where I had married a Geordie girl called Stephanie Cull, who sadly I can't find now because she left me many years ago. 1971. You don't want to know about that. She tried to kill me and then she left me.
Wow, what a life you've had.
Playing in her father's pub, which is called the Londonderry Arms in the centre of Sunderland, probably no longer exists.
Right.
It was a huge and very drunken place. Only the dog and her mother and her could go into the main bars. The father didn't dare, or the son didn't dare. We played upstairs, and I played with the same night as the Northern Front. Now, the Northern Front were a very fine folk outfit, but they had Mick Elliott in it. Mick Elliott became a comic, and a very good Northern comic. I don't know where he is now, but he was brilliant. And I did a routine, the first routine I ever wrote, and the most successful routine I ever wrote. And it went down really well, except for with one section of the audience who wanted to take me out and beat me up. Because I'd sworn it's very sweary, the routine. Alexei Sale did it. He booked it for me at one point. And I kind of almost thought I better not do that again for a bit, but then I did in other places where they weren't quite so sensitive, They did. I was a southern git, as far as their girlfriends listening to somebody swearing like that. So they decided they wanted to beat me up. But the Northern Front, Mick Elliott in particular, rescued me and kept me safe.
Yeah. What's fascinating is I am literally just reading a book on the Edinburgh festivals. We'll come on to Edinburgh later on, and I've just read all about the folk scene,
Oh yeah,
that was one of the areas that developed in the Edinburgh Fringe and the festivals and all the rest
yeah,
of it. And the names that you mentioned, I was like, I know these people. I've just been reading about them. They
yeah.
must have been very influential on you if you
Oh,
started as a folk
phenomenally.
singer.
I went and I heard the first time was in 1960. Let me think now, 65,
Wow.
66, something like that. And I went to a folk club in Plymouth when I was still at school down there. Thank you very much, Don. Um, and I went to this wonderful little folk club again, sort of, I think it was in a very downstairs cellar. And Rambling Jack Elliott, who was
Yeah.
a very famous cowboy flat picker, brilliant. And he sung the song San Francisco Bay Blues. I got my blues from a baby left me by the San Francisco Bay. And he was a fantastic guitarist, flat picking guitarist. That literally that was what the beginning of me wanting A, to play the guitar, B, to go and perform in clubs and a bit and do all that sort of thing. But really what I wanted to do was to be a musician.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. Yeah.
I wasn't good enough, Richard. You know, I just simply didn't put the hours. I did have full-time jobs as well, so I never put the hours in I should have done.
So,
And
when did you realise that um, you could make people laugh in between the songs, just like Billy Connolly does or did?
well, it came slowly, you know, out of desperation because I thought they're not really liking these songs. So I started to do animal impressions and to talk a bit. And I had this routine which I'd kind of stolen off my brother, really. No, I didn't steal the routine. I stole the main frame of the bit. There's a kind of thing which goes, my mate's laughing, I'm laughing, fucking funny, drop a cook, give it a handful, come round and round about going not a good. My mate's laughing, I'm laughing, fucking funny. And I was a biker, you see, I was a biker. So I found
Right.
myself, I used to go down to the Busy Bee, which was a bikers club off the A41 near Watford. It
Right.
doesn't exist anymore. It's a big motel, but it was where like the Ace of Spades was, you know, where all the heroes. I had a little Franny Barnett 125 and a stupid helmet, a round helmet that I looked like some sort of strange knob. And they all took the piss out of me, all the big proper. They called me the professor because I had a new level, you know, and so they had a slightly posh accent, you know, but they were
It's
very sweet
great.
to me because my bike was shit, you know, and so I heard about this story about the race round the Watford bypass, and I put that together with my brother who'd been working at Poundwood Studios had overheard these bikers saying, my mate's laughing, I'm laughing, fucking funny. And he repeated it to my other brother, and I heard it, and I thought, that's such a great line. You know, so I used that as the kind of mantra through and it got sicker and sicker, because the race around
It
the
always does.
yeah, yeah, exactly. What you had to do was you put a 45 record on the jukebox and then ran out to the car park, got on your bike and rode round the Watford bypass and back again before the 45 record stopped.
Wow.
Totally impossible to do. The idea wasn't to do it. The idea was to die on the way, apparently, you know. So I thought, so I just invented this routine which had all sorts of hideous deaths in it, you know, and the police and all sorts. And that was a routine that I used to do in folk clubs when my singing, which was pretty naff, and my guitar playing, which was also pretty naff, didn't go so well, you know.
So tell me about the transition from folk clubs to comedy clubs. How did you get
There was
into the comedy scene? Excuse me.
a period when I stopped doing the folk clubs. But I had various bands,
Yeah.
and one was called Free Fall, which I set up when I left my college with three other students from there. And then I had various other bands who played around, and the transition came I think when I don't remember the dates, but I had a band called no, that came later. Mad Dog and the Rabies Sisters. I'll tell you about that later. But I think the real transition came when I went to the Comedy Store very early on in the Comedy Store days when it was in Maid Street.
Yeah.
This kind of flows into the worst gig I've ever had, sort of thing. But I don't know whether you mind that, but
No, please.
but it was I went in I heard about the Comedy Store and I thought I'd quite like to learn what that's about, go and see it. So I went and signed my name up, and I got on at like 1 o'clock at night or something too. It was in a strip club in Maid
Yeah,
Street.
yeah.
Saturday night, I think it was. And I saw all of the Alexi and Nigel Planer and all of those people. They were fantastic. Yeah. Then I was on, and I did this routine. I did this fucking L-bill routine, which started with me on a kazoo doing a race around the Watford bypass with all the gear changes and the Doppler effect. You see, that went really well. And I did this. I did the sort of poem comedy routine, and they loved it. I thought, oh, I've cracked comedy. This is a great game for me. So I went back 2 weeks later with a brand new routine, which I hadn't thought about at all. And I took my girlfriend and my brother, and I said, come and see me. I'm a comic. Richard, I died the worst death. I don't think anybody's ever died of worst death, ever. It was at 2 o'clock. And I had people literally banging their heads on the table asking me to leave the stage. No. And I couldn't move. I used to tell my students this. I said, because it's an appetite, I became an arse. I had no legs. I had no arms. I had a tiny little head. I was just an arse. And I couldn't move. I was literally trapped. And my mouth was talking rubbish, absolute rubbish. And, my brain had gone. My whole spirit had left me. It was the most incredible experience. And I realized, of course, I have been caned in front of an entire school. Now, if you've ever had that, if you've ever been beaten by a sadistic,
very early on, yeah.
I'll kill if I have. Well, he's dead already, so that's fine. I don't have to murder him anymore. but that was, you become an arse.
Yeah.
It hurts and it's deeply humiliating. Yeah. And it was completely and utterly uncalled for. It always is. You shouldn't cane people ever. But that experience came back to me, you see, and I thought, and I fled, the club. Eventually I got off stage. I don't know how I got off ever. And my girlfriend, was so embarrassed, and my brother was embarrassed. It was awful. It was awful, Richard. And I think it took me 2 weeks before my legs and my head and my arms started to re-emerge. It was very physical. I was walking about like I was an arse with these tiny little appendages, little pentadactyl limbs trying to keep me going, And I eventually, after 2 weeks, I started to think about it. And then I thought, I have to learn how to do that. I can't have that happen to me ever again,
I think I say to a lot of comedians who have been on here, I think that a good comedian has to have a bad gig in order. It's all about experience.
At least one. And I've had many bad gigs, but nothing as bad as that.
Yeah. It's interesting.
Nothing as humiliating and totally destroying as that. Yes, I mean, Max Wall said to me, because I asked him about heckling, he came and talked to my students, and he's wonderful.
Yeah.
Wonderful bloke. And he so charismatic. I've never seen a man walk into a studio with a bunch of young students who had no idea who he was, and he had them literally totally in his hand.
It's amazing when that happens. Amazing, yeah.
They loved him, And I asked him at one point, I said, well, how do you deal with heckling? He said, food and drink to me, old boy, food and drink.
Genius. Genius. He was a comedy great. There was no denying it. Um, when I first came down to London from Carlisle in 1984, 5, something like that,
Mm.
I, like you, discovered the Comedy Store.
Yes.
And the first bill I ever saw, um, I came down to London properly in about 1988. It'd be around then. It would be somebody like um, Richard Morton, Phil Jupitus, and God bless her, dear Linda Smith,
Yes.
who was a regular there. And top of the bill was a comedian, an American comedian called Charles Fleischer, who was never heard of again, and
Yes.
he would be famous for doing voices and everything. And the reason why he was never heard of again was that he went to Hollywood to voice Roger Rabbit, and that was
Oh,
that's his thing. But
yeah.
and that's why this blog is wonderful, because it has so many memories like
Brings
that.
up all those kind of connections. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
But when I
Linda Smith, incidentally, I directed her and Hattie Hayridge in
yeah
a, a two-hander they did at the Edinburgh Festival called Split Teas.
yeah
It was the most extraordinary experience
lovely,
directing
both of
those
them.
two.
Yeah,
They were very great friends, even though they're from different opposite ends of the spectrum politically, but they were great friends and they made each other laugh. They did no work at all. I mean, I could never get them to rehearse. Linda would always arrive at least an hour and a half late. They would then have teas and coffees, and then they would chat and talk. And I was directing them, and they'd done maybe half a bit of a script or whatever it was. But it was the most charming and
oh, it's
totally
yeah.
useless experience.
I used to see her all the time on the news quiz. I used to go to a lot of recordings,
Yes.
and she was just one of the best. And I went to a memorial concert for her at Edinburgh,
Oh,
which was fantastic.
yeah.
And straight afterwards, it was at the Assembly Hall, the Assembly Rooms, and straight after I went round to the Weatherspoons pub next door, and sitting at the bar was Hattie Hayridge, who
Yeah.
I'd never met.
I
And
remember.
I said to her, I've just been to see, and she told me all about her partnership and everything. She was lovely, and I
Yeah.
went to see her show the next night on a
Hattie.
recommendation. A lovely
Hattie
woman.
is a great Hattie for me. I still see Hattie occasionally, and I'm very, very fond of her.
Yeah,
She's a bit of a loss to comedy. She just didn't want to do it anymore. I think she feared that her political views would get in the way of being funny,
yeah,
but I don't
yeah.
think so. I think she could have done it.
She could still keep her. I mean, I would love to talk to her on here.
Yeah.
If I could get her, that would be amazing, because she again, like you, she evokes so many memories for me watching all the comedians growing up. Um,
I'll ask her what she'd say. I think she'd say no,
yeah.
but I can ask her for you.
Well, that would be wonderful if you could. I mean,
Yes.
a similar thing was I was the last person to interview Barry Cryer, God bless him,
Lovely.
because I had Kevin Day on here and we were talking about him, and he said, "Oh yeah," he said, "you can still get him." And I'm like, "Well, can I? Who am I?" So, like you, I had to ring him up, and he was lovely. But once he was on, he was fantastic.
Yeah, he's a charming man. Yeah.
Please do if you could. That would be amazing. Anyway, from the Comedy Store, when
Yes.
I first came down to London, um, I lived in Stoke Newington with my brother. And Stoke Newington is North London, and Crouch End is near to Stoke Newington. And I discovered the wonderful King's Head pub, and in particular downstairs at the King's Head. Tell me about your residency at downstairs at the King's Head Comedy Club, because you were a major part of my enjoyment of comedy when I first came down here. So thank you so much.
Oh, Richard, that's kind of you to say. As I say, I came out of that experience at the Comedy Store thinking I better find out how to do this. And I thought the only way I'm going to find out how to do this really, because there weren't many other clubs, at that
Yeah,
time. Well, there wasn't any. There was the Comedy Store, or there was the folk clubs. And so I started looking for a place to do precisely that, to set up a comedy. I had lots of my students who were good performers, and I thought, well, I can use them. I can put them on, because I didn't know, I had met Alexei because Alexei had asked to do the routine that I did the first time at the Comedy Store, and he'd come and he was sweet to me. He was a very nice man, and
Yeah.
I remember going and selling him that routine in Shepherd's Bush in the Bush Theatre. But so I started looking. I was living in Crouch End with my young family, and I saw the King's Head, and I went down and I looked at the upstairs, and I thought this won't work. I said, "Have you got a basement?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "There's a club there. We've got a sort of bar down there and everything." So I went down, and looked at it, and it was exactly what I was looking for, because I was a kind of devotee of those little places. A place called Bungees in London, which was a downstairs cellar for us folk singers, and it was fantastic. The Troubadour. They had kind of smoky, dangerous, small, intimate. You're literally right there with the audience, and I love that. I love being absolutely in with the audience.
Yeah,
That's
very
the
much so.
thing that
Yeah.
I love. So I was looking for exactly that sort of place, and I spoke to the Malcolm Wilson, who was running. He was the publican, a lovely guy from Middlesbrough, I think. And he was a sweetheart, an ex-butterfly champion, butterfly swimming champion with huge shoulders, and a very nice man. And he said, "Well, you can try it if you like." And that's a shit Middlesbrough accent.
I liked it.
Yeah. So I said, "Oh, I'll do a Sunday night down there." So I started doing these Sunday nights, um, and they were, I had my students coming and doing it. Logan Murray was one of them.
Yeah, being on it. Yeah, yeah,
Pulse, he's a lovely guy,
yeah,
and I had various other people come and do it, but I was terrible at organising it, Richard. Absolutely dreadful, and so I relied enormously on mates and ex-students to come and perform, and it wasn't professionally done. And eventually, I got fed up with the kind of admin of it, and I spoke to Peter, who was at that time, I think, working at Jackson's Lane.
yeah,
He was having a run-in with the woman who was his boss, and because Peter doesn't take fools gladly, and he knows what he wants to do all the time. And so I said, "Well, why don't you come and run the King's Head for me, and then I can stop having to fuck up the administration all the time. You can do that bit." And also because Peter is a very good performer. He doesn't.
yeah,
He's done a lot of performing, and he's a fine musician. And I thought, well, we could do stuff together as well, which we did a bit on the King's Head. And he came and immediately sort of set it up as a professional sort of thing, and got press together and did leafleting, and we had queues going down
yeah,
10. I mean, we used to put, in the early days, we used to put 150, 160 people in there, which was lethal,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and illegal probably. And the smoke, you couldn't see from one end for the smoke. So and I loved that. I just loved the whole kind of the excitement, the buzz of it was
That's
great.
why I do it. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We had Peter on here,
Oh yeah.
and I was so delighted that the film that was out last year about
Billboard. Yeah.
the oldest comedy club in Britain,
Yes.
directed by Joe Bohr.
Yeah.
I believe that the King's Head, is it it hasn't moved from its spot in 40 odd years, is that right?
That's the point. All the others, I think, have moved. Well,
Yeah,
none that came. The only one that came before the King's Head, actually bespoke comedy club of the so-called alternative comedy. Silly phrase, but there.
yeah,
Um, it was the Comedy Store, and
yeah,
I think the Bedford Arms, and
yeah,
then all the others started to come up. Nigel
yeah.
Clough started them, and then there was the Pleasance, not the Pleasance, the place in Camden. I forget what it was called now.
The Camden Comedy Club.
Yeah, no, but there was also a big organisation. What was Jongleurs?
Jongleurs, yeah.
That's right. They started up,
Yeah,
and of course, they were very professional and
yeah,
made lots of money for a bit.
yeah. That's the magic of the King's Head, though, as you say. It's not grunge is the wrong word, but if it's more professional, it's like I love to fly off the seat of my pants when I go there, and that's always been the impression with that club, and that's why it's been so popular. I've had so many happy memories there. I can remember taking a friend of mine from Carlisle who'd hardly ever been to a comedy club, and we went to see a very young Jeff Green. And my friend never, he certainly hasn't got as big a laugh as me. He was crying, and he nearly had to leave
Lovely.
the room. And that's the magic of it. And I always say my favourite ever opening line to a routine to this day is Harry Hill, who I saw there well before he was famous. He brushed past me, jumped up onto the stage, and he went, "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm really sorry I'm late for the show. I had to have a testicle brought down." And there was a pause, and then and a laugh, and then he said, "From Derby." And when I met him 25 odd years later, he shook my hand and he went, "Richard," he said, "I still tell that to this day." What I really admire about him is that he loves the craft, because you could see even then he loves just to perform, and then he gets the TV series and he goes on TV and he does the big arenas, and now he's back in the clubs because he just wants to perform. It's wonderful to watch and see.
Yes. I'm glad they all do want to go and perform live.
Yeah,
It's very difficult. Also, the other thing for very famous comedians coming back into it, having had television success and that, is that they have to not have any expectations about how the audience will receive them.
yeah,
Those who have
yeah,
seen them on telly will be out to bring them down, and and those who have never seen them don't know who they are and don't know why it's so special.
yeah.
It's very difficult, I think, for some of them to go back in. I mean, Alexei Sale has been doing it all along, and is superb anyhow.
He to this day he's one of the greatest. I think
Yes, he,
he just makes it look so easy,
yes,
and he has a way to draw an audience in to make them listen to what he has to say,
yes,
and that's extraordinary.
it is. Yes, yes.
Yeah. You appear to be extremely confident on stage whenever I see you. You're a very, very confident compere and performer. And you're brilliant with audience interaction. Did you ever, or do you ever, get nervous before you go on stage? And if so, how do you cope with the nerves?
Always. I mean, I've never gone on stage to do a live performance or on telly for that matter, without feeling very nervous. I'm. I think I have a degree of ability to disguise it, and to use it. I said to myself very early on, it was very interesting because I did this television thing recently and I had to stand on a stage very still um, for a long time, not for a long time, but for 4 or 5 minutes, very still. I couldn't move, I couldn't do anything. I just had to be there. And my legs started to shake. It was very peculiar. I've never had that before. And I realized that I've always harnessed my adrenaline into something very early on. I learned that it was important to make myself comfortable on stage, whatever happened, that I must do something I loved doing and liked doing. And I loved to dance a bit, and I loved to sing a bit, and I loved to get people doing things, and I like to mess about, and nothing is more exciting than going off on one. Most of my routines have been improvised, and then
Yeah, yeah,
I've used them again and again because they went so well. And so I think for instance, I had a little routine which I would use if I was, still do use if I go on stage, which is a Japanese, yes, an Indian song by Raj Kapoor. And I'd learnt it and I'd translated it into 3 or 4 different languages. And then I'd give and it would get me vocalizing. It would give me a whole script to go through, which I could play with. I could muck about with the audience because I'd get them to sing the first 2 syllables with me. And it would enable me to move without apparently, doing it gratuitously, because I would point to the bits of the body that the song referred to, and dance it almost. And what that did was to get me off on a slightly strange foot, but the audience were going, well, this is interesting, this is different. We've never seen this before. And they were already themselves involved, unless they didn't want to be. And it was never a problem. I didn't care if people didn't join in, but mostly I would tease an audience to join in with me, and because that's part of the compere's job is to make an audience into an audience. What Will Durst calls Audi. He says, you know who Will Durst is? He's a very
very much so,
political American comedian.
Yeah.
He calls the audience Audi.
Mm.
Which is embracing them, bringing them. It's a deliberate ploy, They are now his baby,
Yeah. It's a great idea.
Because you get lots of if you get a whole load of individuals, and that's what happens with really destructive heckling, because from the audience experience, you've suddenly got an individual saying, "I'm not an audience member, I'm me." Which is fine, it's their right to do that, and that's okay. But sometimes the me is a highly destructive prat.
Yeah.
Who's also a bit drunk.
Yeah.
The audience, who you've just spent hours getting to, or minutes getting to be an audience, are suddenly distracted, and broken up. And so now you haven't got that experience. And the most important thing is to try and keep the audience so that they're breathing and laughing as one, because there's nothing more exciting.
Yeah,
Hitler knew this,
Yeah.
Well, the neural.
It's interesting you say that, because my view of heckling is we're not here to hear them, we're here to hear the comedians. So I would sit in silence. That's me. Because normally I have a very loud laugh, as you well know. But if I'm in silence, it's like, why isn't Rich laughing?
Yes. It's very difficult. You'd never want to embarrass an audience. You don't want to have to laugh. That's awful.
Yeah.
And begging for laughs is nothing more
that's
depressing.
I've just been inducted into the British stand-up comedy archive at the University of Kent, and when I go there, it's wonderful to see. I love old programs, old flyers, old comedy bills, and they have one specifically, I think, for the King's Head. Certainly I come across a lot of comedy bills that are on there, and some of the acts that were on there when you were there, it's wonderful, and it's another reason why for me the blog exists, because I list every single event that I've been to, and watching a comedian develop and grow is just a magical thing. I can imagine it must be the same for you.
Oh yeah. When did you start blogging it, Richard?
My first ever comedy gig was 1974, age 7, and it was Les Dawson, and we saw him on holiday in Scarborough with the family, and then a year later I saw Tommy Cooper. And the same venue, and it was incredible. And I made a note of them. And now I've got an enormous spreadsheet of every single act I've ever seen, which became the blog, which is extraordinary.
Wonderful, yes. Yes. Well, I mean, the world needs historians, and it needs
Well, I've got an archive, which is lovely. I've
well,
got my own archive,
well,
you
that's
know.
very, very important stuff.
Yeah,
As far as people that I've seen that have developed, um, all of them, almost all of the people. I don't know any of the younger comedians now because I'm no longer in, haven't been for 20 years, but up until 1999 or
yeah,
2000,
yeah.
I knew almost all of them. I worked with almost all of them.
That's
As a,
fantastic. So there is definitely a book in you about your life,
yeah, yes. I'm not going to tell you. I'm writing. Actually, I just started writing Intimations of Mortality, Richard. So I thought I'd do it now. It's not. It's for me. It's a sort of therapy thing for me.
that's great.
My life has not all been a success, some of it's a disaster.
Everybody's the same. Yeah, yeah,
Yes,
yeah, yeah.
but it's and I'm writing it to try and understand some of that in myself, um, and but I can't tell you the title of it.
No, 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 no,
I wouldn't dream of it because
no.
I'm not sure that it'll ever get published anyhow. But
Well, it would be an amazing read when you
well,
do
I'll
it.
say when I've finished it, which will be in about, I suppose, 4 months' time if I keep writing at the level that I'm writing at the moment. Um, I'll when it's done, I'll send you a copy anyhow, and you can have a laugh.
Oh, that's very kind of you. That's so good of you. Thank you so much. And because you're right. I think that as long as it gets documented, generations to come can go back and say, "Oh, this
Yeah,
must have been amazing," and
but
how everybody developed and
absolutely, it isn't
yeah,
about becoming famous or being a great author or anything, or having very much really to say. One just is documenting the time.
exactly. Yeah. Thank you so much. Do you prefer comparing to delivering a routine, and if so, why?
I very seldom delivered a routine
Right.
because I'm more of a variety artist anyhow. So if I did go and do gigs in other places, which I did do, um, it would be it would be sort of 25 minutes or half an hour of me messing about between music and poems and animal impressions and that sort of thing. Sometimes my favorite moments, Richard, are when I go off on one. When something happens which I'm just you know and the other day I had it. I was comparing a poetry. We have a poetry society down here run by a nice guy called Phil Wellston, who was away, and he asked me to compare it, keep it alive, as it were. And he was going to appear on Zoom halfway through to say how wonderful this poetry thing was, which was fine, except for the Zoom didn't come on. So now we'd already had 4 poets doing this stuff, and so now there was a huge hiatus, and I just happened to have a triangle in my hand. And I'm a dab hand at playing the triangle. So I went into an improvised Serbo-Croat song and poem with the triangle. And every now and then I kept looking around to see if everybody was laughing because they could see I had to keep going somehow. Once I'd started, I had to keep going. And
Yeah,
it got more and more desperate. And I just loved the desperation. So
that's so good.
those are moments I love, when something completely new happens and you find yourself on the spot, literally, and having
I
to dig
had
your way out of it.
I chatted to Gary Morecambe very recently, Eric's son,
Yes, yes.
and there's a section in my blog called "The Ones That Got Away,"
Oh,
and
yeah.
I would have given my right arm to have seen Morecambe and Wise live. I've got every single book, I've got loads of biographies and everything, but every book, every play about them. And you're right, I loved them at their best when they tried to make each other laugh. And they
Yes,
would go off on one, and
yes.
Eric would try and push the boundary. And so many of the great comedians, having
Ooh,
seen so many,
yeah.
you can watch them and you can see them trying. It's the best thing.
It is, yes, because they are absolutely in the present.
Yeah,
They're totally there, and you're there with them, and that's a shared,
yeah,
thing.
yeah,
Hmm.
yeah. It's wonderful. I've also seen you act on stage at the Edinburgh
Oh, you
Festival.
poor bugger.
uh, do you? How does acting differ from stand-up?
Well, I'm a very poor actor, I have to say, and
I
in
think
that,
that's unfair.
well, I was in the. You're talking about the School for Scandal
That's correct. Yeah,
with the wonderful Bridget Christie
yeah.
and Phil Nichols, who
Phil
was
Nichol.
phenomenal,
Yeah,
and Lionel Blair. Oh,
yeah.
also uh, playing very well, actually. Oh, damn, I've forgotten his name. Anyhow, he's a wonderful comedian as well. And he's often on, and he was in that. They were very good. And oh, and what was her name? She had a silly name called Misbehave.
Misbehave. Yeah,
It
yeah, yeah,
was great because she was a cabaret artist. I
yeah.
loved,
That's right. Yeah.
loved her. But I was the worst thing in it, apart from
Rubbish.
no, Lionel Blair upset me because he turned it into a pantomime.
Right.
But I even went away one night and wrote a riposte on stage, which I delivered on stage to his pantomiming it. And I wrote in pure Sheridanese the riposte. I wish I'd kept that because it was bloody good writing.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
I did that. I'd learnt it that night. And when he did his thing where he was suddenly turning the whole thing into an outrageous pantomime, because there's a wonderful moment where he is supposed to be humiliated
Yes.
by the youngsters and the women, and he is literally turned. He should be humiliated, and that's the whole point of the thing. But he refused to have that, and he just insulted the girls in
Yeah,
pantomimic form, which was crude and wrong. So
yeah.
I wrote this thing, and he didn't even notice.
Never.
I had no idea. He just waited for me to give him his cue, and then he went on. Didn't
Oh dear.
it was? I mean, but I have to say about Lionel Blair, he was a very kind man. Actually,
Yeah,
I saw that kindness firsthand, and I
yeah,
liked it. But also, um, he was incredibly poised on stage. He could move about that stage even at that age so much better than I could. I, I had peculiar. I already was a bit arthritic by then, and I
right.
simply could not move with any grace.
Yeah,
So I was constantly fighting my body, which wouldn't do what I wanted it to
yeah,
do.
yeah.
His so clearly did.
So,
I respected that.
so when we were fortunate enough to see the School for Scandal with you in it,
Yeah.
was that just a one-off with the acting, or have you done other bits and pieces?
Done other bits and pieces.
Yeah,
I was in of Mice and Men at the Torch Theatre, done by the wonderful Peter Doran,
yeah,
who was the resident director of the Torch Theatre. And I was very early on in my life. I was in a thing called Hill Eulenspiegel, which was with Michael Rosen and John Dove at the Mercury Theatre. And I've done some telly, tiny bits in telly, but I'm useless on telly, absolutely hopeless. I have no talent with it, and I don't come across well. And I'm not a good actor either. I realized that quite early on, that I actually didn't have quite what it took to be a good actor. Um, Quite a good entertainer when I get it right.
yeah, yeah.
You,
Well, I thoroughly enjoyed your performance. I really did. Um,
you have
to
to say,
date, I
I'm
did, I did, I
not.
did. I'm not just saying it. To date, in your extensive career,
Yes.
what has been your comedy highlight?
Um,
Do you have one?
I have one or two.
Hmm.
One of the most fabulous evenings I had at the King's Head was one of my student nights where we put on the students perform at the end of their course, and we set it up at the King's Head, and it would be packed with their mates, all absolutely up for it and having a great time. And we had one time when Omid Jalili had asked if
Oh,
he could come and do 10 minutes at the end of one of these student nights.
yeah.
We said, yeah, why not? Okay, that's great. We didn't tell the students. And at the end of the night, I just wrapped it up, or the compere, I forget who it was comparing it, wrapped it up. And then he said, we've got a special guest star. And everybody went, who's this? And on came Omid Jalil. Did you do 10 minutes? Richard, he did nearly an hour.
Wow.
You should have seen the students.
He
I
is
mean,
extraordinary.
they will never ever forget it, nor will I, because nor will he
Huh?
actually,
Huh?
because I don't think he's probably ever had an audience like it, because
That's
they
amazing.
were dying with laughter from the moment he arrived on stage. And he was only going to do his 10 minutes, but he couldn't resist to go on, because he was
That's the
having
thing, isn't it? They get a
such
bug.
a great time.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
That place was literally roaring, and I saw on the faces of all those students, the ones who'd performed that night, who suddenly found themselves on the same bill as Omid Jalili, which was nice for them.
Yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
all the others who'd already performed, and all the ones who were there, all their mates. It's sort of, the night was just unique. So that was a joyous night. Yes.
He is one of a kind. I have been a fan of his for years,
Yes.
and he regularly plays headliners at Chiswick, which we go
Uh-huh.
to.
Yes. Yes.
And I know the chap who runs the comedy club there has been on here, and I said to him, I've always wanted to meet him, and I've never had the opportunity.
Yes.
So
Yes.
when he did his routine, he sort of like the promoter sort of beckoned me over, and I had to walk through a corridor into a car park because he was just leaving. And as I was walking through the corridor, all I could hear is, "Where's Richard Gill? Are you Richard Gill?" And when I saw him, he
Yes.
gave me the warmest hug, and he said,
Yes.
"I'm
Yes.
following your blog and your podcast. I'd love to do it, but I'm sure you understand I'm so busy." And I said, "Well, it's so well deserved." And the laughter he's given me over the years, he's
Yes.
one of the best.
Yes, he is. Is that Simon who runs the?
Simon, yeah,
I know
yeah,
him
Simon
very well.
Randall.
I play poker with him.
Oh,
Yes.
yeah, he's a lovely guy,
Yeah,
lovely
he's a
bloke.
sweetheart.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. He sometimes compares it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Um, how do you think comedy has evolved over the last 50 years? Because I'm celebrating my 50th year this year.
Good. Well done.
Thank
Uh,
you.
well, it's interesting, isn't it? When it started, it was for me an extension of the folk club thing. I didn't know very much about. I knew a bit about Northern comics and that because of my experience in Sunderland and knowing Mick Elliott, and I had seen, Chubby Brown, Roy Chubby Brown, and those people. Didn't really like it much, although I wasn't particularly politically offended,
Yeah,
although I saw that it was kind of quite cruel.
yeah,
But I suppose there'd always we've had comedy in this country um, since the early 13th century, and probably before.
yeah,
But you can actually go back to all of Shakespeare's
yeah.
Fool
Very much so. Yeah,
and Jesters and the Commedia dell'arte and all of that stuff. Um, so it's been going on for a long time, and then there was music hall and all of that. So the development is the same thing, the same energy, but being translated into different terms. And what has changed the situation massively is, I think, two things: money and television. And I think that has altered the perspective of people going into comedy. There are some who go into it who can't help themselves. That's what they're going to do. They're always going
yeah,
to do it. And they're not really interested in where it's going to take them. But there are some who go into it undoubtedly for the idea of becoming famous. So it's not an art form anymore. It's not something to learn and cherish. It's a way of getting famous. Now, it may be that they're extremely good, even though they're extremely good comedians, even though that is their main objective. But I guess some of them, it's come upon them by accident, you know. Alan Carr, for instance, who is an incredibly good stand-up. He doesn't do it very much, which is a shame. But he's also developed into a very, very good television performer. I loved his local recent show with with the child playing him.
Yeah, 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 yeah,
The
yeah,
child who's playing him is brilliant.
yeah, yeah,
The program is very, very nice
yeah,
natured. I like it very much, and it is an insight into how he got where he got. You know,
yeah.
I
I
taught
think,
him, and so I know a bit about him. You know.
yeah, yeah.
Mm.
I think it's all dependent on what you want out of it, and I think that if it's going to survive, and I think it will. It's very very healthy at the moment, but it should be available to anybody who wants to have a go. I always remember going to the Edinburgh Fringe last year as an example, and the expense to go is ridiculous now. It's so bad, and I think a band were interviewed on the television, and they won a major prize, and I think it was £10,000. And the interviewer said, "How are you going to spend the money?" And they said, "Well, the money is going to go on the rent for the rest of the run," so they couldn't even enjoy the money. And
No,
I think certainly for something like that, it's not a fringe anymore. It's more of a promotional event, and I think that's wrong.
it
And I
is.
think
It's
anybody,
inevitable, but it
yeah,
is very unfortunate. Yeah,
yeah,
and it is. I mean, I wouldn't go to Edinburgh Festival again now. I can't. I couldn't afford it. You know,
yeah,
but. Yeah, it's quite right, and you know, it is. It becomes, you know, it becomes a sort of a lot of my friends, the people that I grew up with in comedy, like Otis Cannelloni, John,
yeah,
and
yeah, yeah, yeah,
um, those performers of that era are struggling to make a living. You know, they're very fine comedians,
yeah. It's very
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 good
sad.
at what they do, and very experienced. But it's really hard for them. So you know, and there's this constant pressure from below by very young, very talented people who are, but who don't have they haven't learnt quite the way that some of the people used to learn, because the live thing is what teaches you really all of the skills, you know. And I think so. So some are relying on telly too quickly, and if they
Yeah,
get it
yeah,
too quickly, they, you know, the money destroys them because they can suddenly do things that they couldn't do,
couldn't do in the past.
and they were then probably never going to go back and learn the craft properly, you know. But
Well, as long as I can move, I will
yeah,
go to a comedy night and I
yeah,
will write about it and I will support anyone who's willing to have a go. I think it's an incredible art form,
yeah, yeah.
and I think it would be a very sad day if it went.
I don't. I think you're right. I think it will survive.
Hmm.
It's very difficult for the experienced people to keep going because they can't make enough money. But the fact that these open nights, which are very important, which we started at the
Yeah,
King's, you know,
yeah,
the Thursday nights were our invention really, and we celebrated and allowed people to come back time and time again when they were failing. You know, I think we only ever barred one person,
that's amazing.
and I'm pretty sure it was because he was actually. Um, I won't go there. I think he was a dangerous human being.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Um, who are your favourite comedians, past and present? Who makes Huw Thomas laugh?
Oh, thousands of them.
Did you
Thousands of
have comedy growing up?
But of course, Billy Connolly makes me laugh until I cry quite often. I laughed enormously at when I had my appendix out, which I invented when I was 10. No, when I was 13. I invented appendicitis on Paddington Station in order not to have to go back to my boarding school where I was getting thumped every day.
Right.
And so I went to hospital instead, Hillingdon Hospital, and had my appendix out, which was completely unnecessary. Um, but I did come across two of the most beautiful Pakistani nurses who looked after me all night long. And they were sisters, and they were sweet, God, and I was in love with them. That was joyous, and I thought I could be at school having my head thrust down the toilet
Yeah.
with these two beautiful young women. I couldn't believe my luck. But in the morning, a totally different nurse of a much hairier and bigger kind came and decided to shave me. And I said, I don't shave. She said, not there. We're shaving you down there. I said, I don't shave down there either. They said, no, we're giving an operation. I said, who's given permission? Your parents. That was the first time I knew the perfidy of parenthood, you know. And so I had this appendix out for no reason whatsoever. But when I woke up the next after the operation and I was lying in bed after I'd been sick for a day, I was feeling much better. I put the headphones on, these old crystal headphones that they had.
Yeah.
And Bob Newhart came. You know
Oh.
what I mean? He came on the radio, and he was doing a routine about a man looking across a street to a department store, and there was a lady with parcels hanging out of the fifth-story window. And he now decides he's going to try and rescue her. And he's opened the window and he's shouting, hang on, lady. He's got the phone and he's ringing the department building across. And he gets through to complaints, the manager of the second floor, the manager of the third floor, lingerie, furniture department. And he has to constantly repeat what the problem is, that there's this lady hanging out of the window. I cried with laughter. I cried the first time I've ever really cried. Oh no, not the second time I cried with laughter. And I split my stitches.
Genius.
Choice of dying or listening to this routine, you see. So
that's fantastic. And that's
the headphones off and putting
that's why we do it. Yeah.
Trying to call the nurse at the same time.
Yeah. If you're in a moment where you have uncontrollable laughter created by somebody else, you're in that moment and you're there, and it's a very special thing. I had an article.
We all search for, isn't it? You know, along with the best orgasms in the world. That is the greatest experience.
Exactly, I'm 1,000,000% with you on that.
Crying with laughter. Yeah.
I was very fortunate. I think I said earlier on that I've got an article in the British Comedy Guide for my anniversary year, and the bloke who runs that, Mark, said to me, I'd like your top 25 shows. And I said, I can't really give you that because the comedy is subjective. Yeah. What I can do is give you my top 25 moments from the last 50 years. And I literally lifted everything from the blog. I will send you the link. And it's one of the proudest things I've ever done because the moments are basically my life. And it's wonderful that I now get recognised because I go in the front row of comedy clubs and the comedians, I become part of the routine because of the laugh, which I should get insured and all the rest of it. But
you should, yes.
But certainly before I did that, I've been doing that for about 10 years. Before I did that, I used to sit at the back thinking that my laugh would carry and who am I and everything. But certainly sitting on the front row, it's given me a massive amount of confidence, which is what I needed.
Yes.
It's just extraordinary. Say again?
What you're doing is very important. It's lovely that somebody's doing it.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Well, I'm so passionate about it. And what I wanted to say to you was when Downstairs at the King's Head was 40 years old, I was invited by Peter to go along. And I went to Finsbury Park bus station, where I always used to get the bus from on the W7, and there was Arthur Smith. Hello, Richard, lovely to see you, and all that. And just the loveliest man. He's been on here, I know him really well. And we got to the King's Head, and we had a long conversation, and there you were at the door of the King's Head. You walked up the stairs, and you literally said, I recognise that laugh anywhere. And I hadn't seen you for about 20 years. And it was just, that was a moment. And I will
Yeah,
never
yeah,
forget you for that, because you have provided
yeah.
for me so many pleasurable moments at that little club, and long may it last.
Yeah, well, indeed. Well, long may I last.
Well, exactly. Please, yes, of
You have
course.
you have many more years ahead of you.
Well, 3 years and I'm 60.
Great.
They're all laughter lines.
Yeah, good, aren't they?
Just before we go, and I could talk to you all day. It's your anecdotes are incredible. You should write that book. Is there anything else you would like to say? Where if people want to find you on social media? Do you have a podcast? Are you doing any writing? Anything like that?
And I'm not on social. I mean, I do look at Facebook from time to time,
Yeah.
and I'm on it, but I don't ever say anything on
No.
it. I deliberately don't. I sometimes say I like something. I never say I don't like it. I don't, even if I find stuff on there which is hideous, I don't comment
It's
on it. I
yeah.
don't.
The only reason why I go on them
My,
is
my,
to promote this.
like you, I look for joy and for fun, and not for. Although that's not to say I'm not horrified by the way the world is, but
Yeah.
there's not a lot I can do about it. One of
Exactly.
the comedians I admire most, I think, there's two present ones. I mean, there's probably a lot of them actually who are, but of Stuart Lee, of course, because he is so uncompromising.
Yeah.
And one or two of his routines are the greatest routines ever written, really.
Yeah.
Just brilliant.
He is a genius.
The, the greatest and the best routine, which goes through the whole history of the world, the Huguenots and all of that, just phenomenal. And Mark Thomas,
Oh
who
yeah. Yeah.
has a flow an energy and a bite, which and the work he's doing in Palestine
Yeah.
oh,
Incredible.
it is great. And Sam Beale with him, it's lovely. There are many comedians who I adore and who make me laugh still all the time. Amazing
When
thing about Otis Cannelloni,
oh, he's superb.
whose routine I know backwards because I've heard it thousands of times. He makes me laugh every time. Every time he gets me laughing, which it's just extraordinary. Really.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
wish him all the greatest luck in the world because he's a
He's
smashing.
so good. Yeah. Yeah.
Anyhow, there we go, Richard.
When we were at that 40th anniversary gig,
Yeah,
you came back for one night only to
yeah.
compare, and there were the animal impersonations, there was the
Mm-hmm.
guitar. It was just joyous to watch you. And on that bill were some of my favourite comedians. I love Nick Helm. He's the
Yes,
nicest character to
yes,
meet, but it's all a
yes.
persona on stage. So he knows he can get away with murder with me.
Yeah, yeah,
So of course I'm sitting on the front row with my friend,
yeah.
and there was the roll call was, well, it was Arthur Smith, Miles Jupp, um, Nick Helm, Phil Nicol, and Al Murray, and every one of them had a go at me, and I absolutely loved it. And I love Al Murray. I think he's one of the best. With an audience, he's brilliant.
He's great. I
And
had him down here to the Astor Theatre years
oh,
ago.
lovely.
He went down a bomb. Yeah,
Yeah, when he walks on, he has a pint of beer that obviously will spill over the front
yeah,
row. And when he saw me in the front row, he literally poured through that pint of beer all over me, and he said, "It's great to see you." I
yeah.
was sitting there
Did,
drenched.
did you? Are you old enough to have seen John Sparks?
Oh, he was superb.
I mean, he kind of originated that coming on with.
Yeah,
He used to come on with two beers.
yeah, 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 yeah. Well, Al Murray, I can remember Al Murray doing machine gun
Yes,
impersonations
yes, that's right. He was
before,
famous.
trying to find his
There was another
persona.
guy who also did it. There was a guy who that was all he did really was impressions of military vehicles and guns.
Yeah,
But Al Murray was
yeah,
brilliant.
And again, left field. I love that.
Right. That's when we started, you see, with Peter and I at the King's Head. We both were really into variety
Yeah.
because we had music and fire and even stilt walking in there. Peter
Yeah, yeah,
Hutchins is
yeah, yeah. That's the magic of
wonderful,
it. You
very
know, yeah.
clever player. It was wonderful he did that stuff. I don't know how he juggled and stilt walked in that room. That's
Yeah.
quite, you know. And we wanted that variety, but that's where you were asking me the question about how it's all changed. Well, it became almost impossible for us to do variety because the audience would turn off
Yeah.
unless there was a comedian, in their face, as it were. And they just wouldn't listen to music, or they'd start talking. And it was so we never got that. That was one of my great disappointments. We never got that sort of variety thing really purring along as we should have done. We tried, as Peter was into it as well, but didn't happen.
When I used to go and see Ken Dodd
Yeah,
on Variety. I love Ken Dodd, absolutely love him.
yeah,
He's one of the greats, and he would always insist on a variety show.
yeah,
So he would have a pianist, a musician, a juggler, and then at the end of each half, he'd do his hour long or longer
yeah,
routines. He and to have the variety in, you were ready for him. The big hit at the Edinburgh Fringe this year, the big play, which I'm hoping is going to go into the West End, is a thing called The Last Laugh, and
right.
it's three actors. One of them plays Eric Morecambe, one of them plays Tommy Cooper, and one of them plays Bob Monkhouse, and they're all superb and
Oh, yeah,
all about their careers, which were all about variety bills and all the rest of it. I love that. If somebody has a book of variety bills, I will buy it because I love to
yeah,
see all the names and how they started off, like me with
yes, of
this. You know,
course. Yeah.
I find it fascinating.
If you were talking to Sam Beale,
Right,
she did her research into music hall and
right,
women in music, so she may
yeah,
have come across. She may well have
right.
come across. There's
Well,
a
listen,
woman
my
who's
friend. As I say, I could talk to you all day. I've so much enjoyed our chat.
good, yeah. It's been nice to talk to you, Richard.
It's
Very nice.
been lovely, and I wish
We
you
never
every
really sat down and
success.
just chatted. But now we've done it. We can do it again.
That was like Gary Morecambe. He said, "I've just started. I could do a part two if you want to." Like
Yeah,
it's Gary Morecambe, for God's sake. But no, it is, and thank you so much for all you've done for comedy over the years.
it's a pleasure to talk to you. Yeah,
Thank you
pleasure
very
to
much
talk.
for your time.